Rosa had learned early on that her skin wasn't just part of who she was. It was a map filled with lines the world insisted on drawing for her. As a child, she thought people spoke to her differently because she was small. "One day when I'm older, they'll listen," she would tell herself. But at 8, after turning in a carefully completed homework assignment, she overheard her teacher mutter, "This isn't enough." That phrase had echoed ever since. Not enough. By 16, the echo had become a storm. She wanted to join her school's debate team. Rosa was articulate, persuasive, and quick on her feet, but the coach didn't even look her in the eye. "I don't think you're the right fit," he said with a rehearsed smile. At home, she cried into her pillow until her eyes swelled shut, but the next day she did what she did best, pretended it didn't matter. Now, at 18, standing before the massive and imposing gates of Redstone University, Rosa felt every one of those moments pressing on her shoulders. She gripped the strap of her only well-worn backpack as her eyes traced the carved letters at the entrance. Excellence through legacy. Legacy. It was a word she knew only from hearing about it, something reserved for people like Daniel King and his crowd, people who were born with the certainty that they belonged here. Rosa, on the other hand, only had her scholarship and a pile of rejection letters from other universities that hadn't wanted to take a chance on someone like her. But Redstone had said yes, or at least, the paper had. The gates creaked open slowly as Rosa stepped through. "This time," she muttered to herself, "they'll listen." The campus was breathtaking. Ivy-covered buildings, immaculate lawns where students laughed in tight-knit groups, and a central library that loomed like a castle at the heart of it all. Rosa walked slowly, trying to absorb everything, but every step felt like an intrusion. She passed a table where a group of blonde, polished students chatted loudly, their clothes as flawless as magazine covers. They glanced at her but said nothing. They didn't need to. Rosa knew that look. She'd seen it in the grocery store line, in doctors' offices, even in the mirror sometimes. It was a look that said, "You don't belong here." She pretended not to notice. Pretending was a skill she mastered as well as mathematics. Later in the library, Rosa discovered that this space had its own unspoken rules. She picked a table in the corner, far from the main flow, and opened her books. She was jotting down notes furiously when a shadow fell across her. "You're new here," a male voice said. She looked up to find Daniel King standing over her in all his entitled aristocratic glory. The casual blazer he wore looked far too expensive for someone his age. "Yes," Rosa replied simply, keeping her eyes on her notebook. "I know who you are," he continued, pulling out a chair uninvited and sitting down. "You're the scholarship girl, Rosa. Something. Rosa Martins," she corrected, her tone calm, though her heart pounded in her chest. Daniel leaned over the table, glancing at her books with mild disdain. "You know this place isn't for everyone, right?" Rosa closed her notebook slowly, meeting his gaze. "If this place is a library, then it's exactly for me." For a moment, something like surprise flickered across Daniel's face, but he quickly recovered his smug composure. "Good luck," he said as he stood. "You'll need it." In the days that followed, Rosa felt the invisible weight of stares and comments trailing her through the hallways. Professors corrected her loudly for minor mistakes. In seminars, no one sat beside her. Someone even left a note on her desk in class. "Go back to where you came from." She carried each insult like stones, piling them up without letting them fall. At night, in the tiny dorm room she shared with a distant, silent roommate, Rosa cried quietly. But in the morning, she woke up, put on her best outfit, and marched back into the battle. One night, alone in the library, something unexpected happened. While searching for references for a paper, Rosa stumbled upon an old book tucked away on a dusty shelf outside the catalog system. The leather-bound cover was worn, its gold-embossed title barely legible, Stories of Those Who Shouldn't Have Made It. She opened the book and found tales of people who had faced the impossible, men and women discarded by the world but who refused to accept their labels. One sentence burned itself into her mind. "The strength of a soul is greater than the weight of any judgment." Rosa closed the book, but the words repeated themselves in her mind like a mantra. For the first time since arriving at Redstone, she felt something beyond fear and doubt. She felt something that resembled hope. Rosa's days at Redstone quickly fell into a pattern, though it was a rhythm she hadn't asked for. Mornings started with hurried walks to class. Her backpack weighed down by more than just books. She would sit near the back of the lecture halls, taking meticulous notes while the students around her engaged in small talk she was never invited into. Her professor's tone toward her ranged from overly formal to vaguely dismissive. Dr. Klein, her political science instructor, was a particular challenge. On her first essay, he'd written in red ink at the bottom, "Your analysis lacks depth, though your effort is commendable." Rosa had reread the feedback 5 times. Was it praise or an insult wrapped in polite language? She wasn't sure. Outside the classroom, the world of Redstone moved at a pace Rosa struggled to match. Student organizations hosted lavish events where everyone seemed to know each other. Intramural games filled the lawns with boisterous laughter and cheers. And then there were the legacy students like Daniel King, who moved through campus with an air of inevitability. Daniel's family name was on one of the dormitories, the science building, and the endowment wall in the library's foyer. It seemed that every professor knew him personally. He wasn't just a student. He was a symbol of what Redstone valued most. Rosa, on the other hand, had no legacy. Her mother, Maria Martins, worked as a custodian at a local middle school. On weekends, she cleaned houses for extra income. Rosa's father had disappeared from their lives when she was barely 2, leaving Maria to raise her daughter alone in a cramped apartment on the south side of Birmingham. "Work twice as hard," her mother always said, "and they'll only notice you half as much, but don't stop. One day they'll have no choice." Rosa lived by those words. She remembered watching her mother scrub floors late into the night, her hands cracked and calloused. It was Maria who had insisted Rosa apply to Redstone. "You're better than this place," her mother had said, gesturing to their tiny apartment. "You deserve the world, even if it doesn't deserve you." The library became Rosa's sanctuary. Amidst its towering bookshelves and dimly lit corners, she found solace in the company of words. She spent hours there, reading everything from political philosophy to the personal memoirs of activists who had fought battles that felt eerily similar to her own. It was also in the library that Rosa first met Priya Patel, a graduate student in the sociology department. Priya had noticed Rosa poring over the same book for hours and struck up a conversation. "Looks like you're trying to memorize the whole thing," Priya said with a warm smile. Rosa hesitated before responding. "It's a lot to process." Priya pulled out a chair and joined her without waiting for an invitation. She was bold, with thick-framed glasses and a confidence Rosa envied. "Let me guess, first-year scholarship student? And everyone's making you feel like you don't belong." Rosa blinked, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, I've been there," Priya continued. "Not here specifically. I went to a state school for undergrad. But the feeling's the same. Like you're playing a game no one taught you the rules to." For the first time in weeks, Rosa felt her guard lower. The two talked for hours that night, their conversation stretching from academic struggles to shared stories of being underestimated. "You know," Priya said as they packed up their things, "you're going to do fine here, but not because of them, because of you." Meanwhile, Daniel King's attention lingered on Rosa more than she realized. To him, she was an anomaly, a disruption in the carefully curated ecosystem of Redstone. She wasn't just different, she was defiant. One afternoon, as Rosa was leaving the library, Daniel intercepted her at the steps. "You're spending a lot of time in there," he said casually, gesturing toward the building. "It's a library," Rosa replied. "That's what it's for," he smirked. "I'm just saying, don't wear yourself out. Redstone's not exactly forgiving to people who don't keep up." Rosa met his gaze, her voice steady. "Maybe you should worry less about me, and more about why you feel the need to remind me of that." For a moment, Daniel seemed caught off guard. Then, with a shrug, he turned and walked away. As weeks turned into months, Rosa's determination began to show results. Her grades climbed steadily, and Dr. Klein's feedback shifted from curt criticisms to cautious praise. Priya became her unofficial mentor, introducing her to study techniques and encouraging her to apply for internships. Yet, the pressure never let up. Rosa still woke up each day feeling like she had something to prove, not just to Redstone, but to herself. One evening, Rosa attended a campus debate out of curiosity. The topic was immigration policy, a subject that hit close to home for her. The panel included several professors and a handful of students, including Daniel King. As she listened, Rosa felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. The arguments were polished but detached, as if the people being discussed were abstract concepts rather than real lives. When it was time for audience questions, Rosa raised her hand. "I have a question," she began, her voice cutting through the room's murmurs. "Do you think it's possible to create policies that are fair when the people making them don't understand the struggles of those they're affecting?" The room went silent. Daniel, who was moderating, cleared his throat. "That's an interesting perspective. Care to elaborate?" Rosa stood, her heart pounding. "I think it's easy to debate ideas when they don't affect you personally, but for the people living those realities, it's not just policy, it's survival." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than disdain in Daniel's eyes. Respect, perhaps. By mid-semester, Rosa had learned to navigate Redstone's unspoken rules. She knew which professors would demand more of her than her peers, and which students to avoid in group projects. But learning the rules didn't mean she accepted them. She pushed against the limits, quietly but persistently, knowing each small victory mattered. Her political science class was the crucible, where those battles played out most visibly. Dr. Klein was known for his demanding teaching style, and even more for his rigid grading. Rosa had scored a B+ on her first midterm. Decent by most standards, but not enough for her. After class, Rosa approached his desk, her notebook clutched tightly in her hand. "Dr. Klein, I was wondering if we could go over the midterm. I'd like to understand what I missed." He looked up from his papers, his expression neutral but not unkind. "You did well, Ms. Martins. There's nothing to worry about." "I know," Rosa said, her voice steady, "but I want to do better." Dr. Klein studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fine. Office hours tomorrow at 3 p.m. The next day, Rosa arrived early, her questions meticulously prepared. Dr. Klein walked her through the nuances of the exam, challenging her to think deeper, to push her arguments further. By the end of the session, his demeanor had shifted. "You have potential, Ms. Martins," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But potential isn't enough here. You'll need to prove it." "I intend to," Rosa replied without hesitation. Outside the classroom, tensions were building. A group project in her sociology class brought Rosa face to face with her peers in a way she couldn't avoid. She was assigned to a team with 3 other students, including Emily Carter, one of Daniel King's closest friends. From the start, Emily made her position clear. "I'll handle the presentation," she announced in their first meeting. "Rosa, you can put together the slides." Rosa's jaw tightened. "I'm good with presentations." Emily raised an eyebrow, her smile condescending. "I'm sure you are, but this is important, and I've done this kind of thing before." Rosa didn't argue, at least not then. She focused on her portion of the project, pouring hours into research and crafting a compelling argument. At their final meeting, she brought it up again. "I think it makes sense for me to present this section," Rosa said, keeping her tone calm but firm. Emily sighed, flipping through the printed slides. "Fine, if you insist." When the presentation day arrived, Rosa stood at the front of the classroom, her palms slightly damp, but her voice steady. She delivered her portion with confidence, her arguments sharp and persuasive. By the time she finished, the room was silent, and even Emily looked impressed. Later, as they packed up their materials, Emily muttered, "You're full of surprises." "Maybe you should stop being surprised," Rosa replied, her tone light but pointed. Daniel King continued to hover at the edges of Rosa's world, his presence both irritating and unavoidable. He seemed to take a strange interest in her, showing up at events she attended and finding excuses to engage her in conversation. One afternoon, as Rosa sat under a tree on the quad, reading a book for her sociology class, Daniel appeared out of nowhere. "Do you ever take a break?" he asked, dropping into the grass beside her without waiting for an invitation. "Do you ever mind your own business?" Rosa shot back, not looking up from her book. Daniel chuckled. "Touché. Seriously, though, you've got this whole lone warrior thing going on. It's admirable, I guess." Rosa closed her book, finally meeting his gaze. "If you're trying to figure me out, don't bother. I'm not here to make sense to you." For once, Daniel didn't have a quick retort. He sat quietly for a moment before standing up. "You're interesting, Rosa. I'll give you that." As he walked away, Rosa couldn't decide if he was mocking her or if there was something genuine in his tone. But the greatest challenge came just days before the midterm exams. Rosa received an email from the university's financial aid office, summoning her for an urgent meeting. When she arrived, the advisor's expression was apologetic but firm. "Ms. Martins, there's been an issue with your scholarship renewal. Some paperwork was missing from your application, and unfortunately the deadline has passed." Rosa's heart sank. "But I submitted everything on time. I triple-checked it." The advisor shook her head. "I understand your frustration, but there's nothing we can do at this point. Your scholarship covers this semester, but without renewal, you'll be responsible for the next." The weight of those words hit Rosa like a punch. There was no way she could afford Redstone without her scholarship. As she left the office, her mind raced. She couldn't let this be the end. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be stopped by a technicality. She made a decision right then. She would fight. Rosa spent the evening in the library, staring at the email from the financial aid office on her laptop. Her pulse raced as she mentally calculated what it would cost to stay at Redstone without the scholarship. It was impossible. Her mother barely made enough to cover their modest life back home, and taking on a loan of that size felt like stepping into a bottomless pit. As her laptop screen dimmed from inactivity, Rosa snapped it shut and rested her head in her hands. "Everything okay?" Priya's voice broke through the silence. Rosa looked up to see her friend standing with a cup of tea in one hand and a book tucked under her arm. "Not even close," Rosa admitted. She explained the situation, her words spilling out in a rush. "They're saying I missed some paperwork, but I didn't. I know I didn't." Priya set the tea down on the table and took a seat across from her. "If you know you're right, don't let them brush you off. Bureaucracies like this count on people giving up." Rosa leaned back in her chair. "How do I fight this? I don't even know where to start." "You start with persistence," Priya said with a determined smile, "and a paper trail. 3 or 4 CMI the next day." Rosa began her campaign. She visited the financial aid office with a binder full of documents and emails she'd kept. Each time they dismissed her with vague promises to look into it, she pushed back, calmly but firmly. When that didn't work, she escalated to the dean's office, leaving messages that went unanswered. Days turned into weeks, and Rosa's frustration grew. Priya offered her advice and moral support, but even she admitted that the university's system wasn't designed to help students like Rosa. Amid this chaos, Rosa's sociology project with Emily and the others took an unexpected turn. After their successful presentation, Emily had begun to show a grudging respect for Rosa's work ethic. During one of their study sessions, she confessed something that caught Rosa off guard. "I used to think people like you had it easier," Emily said, not meeting Rosa's eyes. Rosa froze mid-sentence. "What do you mean by people like me?" Emily hesitated before continuing. "Scholarship students. You get this huge opportunity and it's like a golden ticket." Rosa's laugh was bitter. "A golden ticket? You think fighting for every inch of respect is easy?" Emily flushed. "I didn't mean it like that. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. And maybe that's part of the problem." Rosa didn't respond immediately. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand why Emily hadn't bothered to think about this before. But another part of her, one that felt exhausted by anger, saw a chance for understanding. "It's not easy," Rosa finally said, "but it's worth it. Because every step I take proves that I belong, no matter what anyone says." For the first time, Emily seemed to truly listen. "Do you want reason?" Meanwhile, Daniel King's interest in Rosa deepened in ways neither of them could fully understand. One afternoon, while walking across campus, Rosa spotted Daniel sitting on the steps of the administration building, talking to someone she recognized from the financial aid office. Her chest tightened. Was this a coincidence, or was he somehow connected to her scholarship issue? The next time she saw him, she confronted him directly. "Were you in the administration building yesterday?" Rosa asked, her tone sharp. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I might have been. Why?" "Don't play games with me, Daniel. Are you involved in my scholarship problem?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "What? No, why would I care about your scholarship?" Rosa studied his expression, searching for any hint of dishonesty. Finally, she shook her head. "If I find out you're messing with me—" "Relax," Daniel interrupted, his voice softer than usual. "I'm not your enemy, Rosa. Believe it or not, I'm actually rooting for you. She didn't know how to respond to that. As the semester neared its end, Rosa's fight with the university reached a breaking point. After weeks of persistence, she managed to secure a meeting with the dean of students. The room was stark and intimidating, with tall windows that let in too much light. Rosa sat across from the dean, her binder open on the table. "Ms. Martins," the dean began, his tone measured, "I've reviewed your case. While I appreciate your dedication, the scholarship committee's decision is final." Rosa's stomach dropped, but she didn't let it show. "I understand the rules, sir, but the mistake wasn't mine. I followed every step of the process, and I have proof." The dean sighed, clearly tired of the conversation. "Even if that's true, the deadline has passed. There's nothing I can do." Rosa clenched her fists under the table. "You mean you won't do anything?" The dean frowned. "I suggest you tread carefully, Ms. Martins." But Rosa wasn't backing down. "With all due respect, sir, I've worked too hard to be dismissed because of a technicality. If this were a legacy student in my position, would we even be having this conversation?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The dean leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'll review the case again. That's all I can promise." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. The email came late one night just as Rosa was closing her laptop. She opened it without much expectation, but as her eyes scanned the message, her heart began to race. "Dear Ms. Martins, after further review of your case, the scholarship committee has agreed to reinstate your financial aid. Please ensure all future documents are submitted by the posted deadlines. Congratulations, and we wish you continued success at Redstone University." For a moment, Rosa just sat there, rereading the words over and over. Relief washed over her in waves, but it was quickly followed by anger. She had spent weeks fighting for what was rightfully hers. Weeks that could have been spent studying, resting, or simply breathing without the constant knot of anxiety in her chest. Priya was the first person Rosa told. "I knew you'd pull it off," she said with a grin, but her expression sobered when Rosa didn't smile back. "It shouldn't have taken this much," Rosa said, her voice heavy. "You're right," Priya agreed, "but you proved something, Rosa, to them and to yourself." Rosa nodded, though a part of her still felt the sting of injustice. A week later, Rosa was called into Dr. Klein's office unexpectedly. She braced herself for criticism, but the professor's tone surprised her. "I wanted to talk about your last paper," he said, sliding it across the desk toward her. Rosa picked it up and scanned the grade. "A. It's excellent work," Dr. Klein continued. "You've shown a depth of analysis I don't see often in first-year students." "Thank you," Rosa said cautiously, unsure of where this was going. Dr. Klein leaned forward. "I'm running a research project on policy impacts in underserved communities. It's an independent study, but I think you'd be a valuable addition. Would you be interested?" Rosa blinked, momentarily stunned. "Are you serious?" "Quite," he replied. "Think about it and let me know by the end of the week." Meanwhile, Daniel King's behavior had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. He no longer taunted Rosa in passing, and during a group discussion in class, he even sided with her argument, something that raised a few eyebrows. One evening, after a lecture, Daniel caught up with Rosa as she walked back to the dorms. "Martins," he called, jogging to keep pace with her. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, not slowing down. He hesitated before replying. "I wanted to say, good job on your presentation last week. It was impressive." Rosa stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "What's your angle, King?" "No angle," he said, raising his hands defensively. "Look, I know I've been difficult, but maybe I underestimated you, that's all." Rosa studied him, searching for a hint of sarcasm or condescension. But for once, Daniel seemed sincere. "Well," she said finally, "maybe you should stop underestimating people in general." "Fair enough," he said with a small smile. The real turning point came at the annual Campus Debate Championship. It was one of Redstone's most prestigious events, drawing students, faculty, and even alumni. Rosa had entered on a whim, encouraged by Priya and bolstered by her recent successes. She was shocked when she made it to the final round. Even more shocking was her opponent, Daniel King. The topic was immigration reform, a subject Rosa felt deeply connected to, but knew would be polarizing in a room full of privileged students. As the debate began, Daniel opened with a polished argument. citing statistics and historical precedent with ease. The audience responded warmly, nodding along to his points. When it was Rosa's turn, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Numbers are important," she began, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "But they don't tell the whole story. Behind every statistic is a person, a family whose life is shaped by these policies. I know because I've lived it." The room fell silent as Rosa shared part of her own story. Her mother's struggles as an immigrant, the sacrifices she made to give Rosa a chance at something better, and the resilience it took to navigate a world that often seemed determined to push them aside. By the time she finished, the audience was visibly moved. Even Daniel looked affected. The judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity before announcing the winner, Rosa Martins. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time at Redstone, Rosa felt seen, not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned her place. After the event, Daniel approached Rosa, clapping her on the shoulder. "You deserved that win," he said simply. "Thanks," Rosa replied. As he walked away, Rosa felt a strange sense of closure. For all the battles she had fought at Redstone, this victory felt like the one that mattered most. Winning the debate championship was a victory that reached far beyond the trophy Rosa carried back to her dorm that night. It was a declaration, her proof that she belonged at Redstone, not because of her scholarship, but because of her determination and skill. The aftermath was immediate. Professors who had once dismissed her now greeted her with nods of approval. Klein even mentioned her performance in class, something he rarely did for anyone. Students she barely knew congratulated her in passing, though she couldn't help but notice the lingering tone of surprise in their voices. One day, as she walked across campus, Emily caught up with her. "That was impressive, Rosa," she said, a mix of genuine admiration and residual awkwardness in her tone. "Thanks," Rosa replied, unsure how to feel about Emily's sudden warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said during the debate," Emily continued, "about people's lives being more than statistics. I think I've missed a lot of that in how I see things." Rosa didn't respond immediately. She wanted to believe Emily's change of heart was sincere, but part of her still remembered the condescension from their early interactions. "I guess it's never too late to see things differently," Rosa said carefully. Emily smiled, seeming to take it as encouragement. "I'd like to keep learning. If you're open to it, maybe we could talk more about this sometime." Rosa hesitated but nodded. Sure. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step. Daniel King was harder to read. After the debate, his interactions with Rosa grew more neutral, even respectful. He no longer sought her out to provoke her, and when they crossed paths, his nods carried a quiet acknowledgement. One afternoon, Daniel approached her after class. "You know, Rosa, you could have taken that win and rubbed it in my face," he said, leaning casually against the wall. "Would it have made a difference?" Rosa asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel chuckled. "Probably not, but I respect that you didn't. You've got guts, Martins." Rosa tilted her head, studying him. "Why does it sound like you're trying to make peace?" "Maybe I am," Daniel admitted, surprising even himself. "We don't have to be friends, but we don't have to be enemies either." Rosa considered his words before replying. "I guess that depends on you, King." He gave a small smile. "Fair enough." As Rosa's confidence grew, so did her opportunities. Dr. Klein's research project became a cornerstone of her academic life. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and for the first time Rosa felt like she was contributing to something meaningful. The project focused on the systemic barriers faced by marginalized communities, a subject Rosa understood deeply. One day during a meeting with Dr. Klein, he paused mid-sentence and looked at her thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered pursuing a career in policy work?" he asked. Rosa blinked, caught off guard. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Well, you should," Dr. Klein said. "You have a perspective that this field desperately needs. Think about it." The idea lingered in Rosa's mind. Could she turn her experiences into a way to make real change? The thought both excited and terrified her. But not all reactions were positive. The debate win and her growing presence on campus drew attention, not all of it welcome. One evening, Rosa found a note slipped under her dorm door. It was handwritten on plain paper. "You're only here because they want to look good. Don't forget that." Her hands shook as she read the words. For all her progress, there were still people who saw her success as illegitimate. She called Priya, who arrived within minutes. "You're not seriously letting this get to you, are you?" Priya asked, her voice filled with a mix of anger and concern. "It's hard not to," Rosa admitted. "Sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Priya sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me, Rosa. The fact that they're trying to bring you down means you're doing something right. You're making them uncomfortable, and that's a good thing." Rosa nodded, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let a cowardly note derail her. The consequences of Rosa's actions extended beyond her personal life. Her win in the debate had sparked conversations across campus about diversity, privilege, and opportunity. Some students began questioning the university's admissions policies, while others defended the status quo. At a student council meeting, Rosa found herself in the middle of a heated discussion about expanding financial aid programs. "Why should we prioritize scholarships when some students are struggling to afford the basics?" one council member argued. "Because scholarships aren't handouts," Rosa countered. "They're investments in people who can make a difference if given the chance. Isn't that what education is supposed to be about?" Her words were met with murmurs of agreement and a few skeptical glances, but she didn't back down. Through it all, Rosa continued to grow. Each challenge sharpened her resolve. Each victory reinforced her belief in her own worth. She knew she wasn't finished. Redstone had changed her, but she had also begun to change Redstone. Rosa's second semester at Redstone began with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. The scholarship debacle, the debate championship, and her growing presence on campus had given her more than just confidence. They had given her a vision of what she wanted to achieve. Her schedule was grueling. Between Dr. Klein's research project, her classes, and a new internship at a local nonprofit focused on education access, Rosa rarely had time to breathe, but she thrived on the chaos. Every paper she wrote, every meeting she attended, and every argument she presented felt like a step toward something greater. She had also started mentoring other scholarship students, organizing informal study groups in the library. At first, only a handful showed up, but word spread, and soon the group grew. Rosa found herself in a leadership role she hadn't expected, but it felt natural. One evening, after the study group had dispersed, Priya lingered behind. "You're building something here," Priya said, gesturing to the empty chairs. Rosa shrugged. "I'm just trying to help." "It's more than that," Priya insisted. "You're showing people what's possible. Don't underestimate how powerful that is." Rosa smiled, though she still struggled to see herself the way Priya did. Despite her progress, the challenges hadn't disappeared. Daniel King's grudging respect had softened into something that bordered on camaraderie, but not everyone in his circle shared his change of heart. At a campus event discussing diversity in higher education, Rosa found herself on a panel with Daniel and Emily. The discussion was civil at first, but tensions rose when an audience member asked whether diversity initiatives undermined meritocracy. "I think we need to be honest about what we mean by merit," Rosa said. "If merit only measures access to opportunity, then it's not really merit at all." A voice from the audience interrupted. "That's easy for you to say when you've been handed everything on a silver platter." The room fell silent. Rosa's chest tightened, but she refused to look away from the speaker, a student she didn't recognize. "I wasn't handed anything," Rosa said calmly. "I earned my place here just like you. And if you want to talk about silver platters, maybe we should look at the legacy admissions process." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, and Rosa felt a surge of defiance. She had stopped running from these confrontations. Now she faced them head-on. Dr. Klein's research project became both a challenge and an opportunity for Rosa to hone her skills. The work required her to analyze complex data sets and synthesize them into actionable recommendations. It was exhausting, but exhilarating, and she often found herself staying late in the library, poring over charts and case studies. One evening, Dr. Klein approached her as she packed up her materials. "I've been reviewing your contributions," he said. "You have a knack for this work, Rosa. Have you considered applying for summer fellowships?" Rosa hesitated. The idea of competing for a prestigious fellowship seemed daunting, but the prospect was also exciting. "I wouldn't know where to start," she admitted. Dr. Klein smiled. "Start by believing you're qualified, because you are. The nonprofit internship also pushed Rosa in unexpected ways. Her supervisor, a seasoned activist named Clara, saw potential in Rosa and often challenged her to think bigger. "You're sharp, Rosa," Clara said during one of their meetings. "But if you want to make real change, you need to learn how to lead. It's not just about being right, it's about bringing people with you." Clara's words stayed with Rosa. She began to see leadership not as a burden, but as a responsibility. The semester's turning point came when Rosa was invited to speak at a university forum on educational equity. It was a high-profile event, and Rosa was both thrilled and terrified. The night before the forum, she sat in her dorm, scribbling notes and rehearsing aloud. "You're overthinking it," Priya said, sitting on Rosa's bed. "Just speak from your heart." "That's easy for you to say," Rosa replied. "You're not the one standing in front of half the campus tomorrow." Priya laughed. "You've faced worse. You've got this." The forum was held in the university's largest auditorium, and it was packed. As Rosa took the stage, she felt the familiar rush of nerves, but she steadied herself, gripping the podium tightly. She spoke about her journey, the barriers she had faced, and the need for institutions like Redstone to not just open their doors, but actively support the students who walked through them. "For too long, we've measured success by exclusion," Rosa said, her voice steady. "But true excellence comes from inclusion, bringing in voices that challenge us, that force us to see the world differently. That's how we grow." When she finished, the audience erupted into applause. For the first time, Rosa didn't feel like an outsider on this campus. She felt like a leader. By the end of the semester, Rosa had grown in ways she hadn't imagined. She was no longer just surviving at Redstone. She was thriving, shaping the campus in her image. But she knew her journey was far from over. There were still battles to fight, and she was ready for them. The final weeks of Rosa's semester were a whirlwind. Between her classes, internship, and growing responsibilities on campus, she felt like she was running a marathon with no finish line in sight. Yet, there was a sense of purpose driving her forward, a clarity she hadn't felt before. The forum speech had made waves, drawing praise from students and faculty alike, but it had also stirred resentment in some quarters. Online message boards buzzed with anonymous posts accusing Rosa of playing the victim or taking opportunities away from more deserving students. She tried not to let it bother her, but the hostility lingered like a shadow. One evening, as Rosa walked back to her dorm after a late study session, she noticed a flyer taped to a lamppost. It was for a new initiative spearheaded by the Student Council, a scholarship expansion proposal designed to provide more resources for students from underserved backgrounds. Rosa's heart leapt as she read the details. This was exactly the kind of systemic change she had dreamed of, something that could open doors for so many others. But as she scanned the fine print, her excitement dimmed. The proposal was backed by several influential student leaders, including Daniel King. "Of course," Rosa muttered under her breath. Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this another performative gesture designed to protect the status quo? Or had Daniel truly been influenced by their interactions? The next day, Rosa confronted Daniel in the library where he was sitting with a group of his friends. "King," she said, her tone sharp enough to turn heads. "Can I talk to you?" Daniel looked up, surprised but intrigued. "Sure." They stepped into a quiet corner and Rosa wasted no time. "This scholarship proposal, is it real or is it just for show?" Daniel frowned. "It's real, Rosa. Why would you think otherwise?" "Because I've seen too many empty promises," Rosa replied. "If this is just a PR move, people like me will pay the price." Daniel crossed his arms, his expression serious. "It's not just for show. I've been listening, Rosa, to you, to others, and maybe I've been wrong about some things. But if you think I'm doing this just to look good, you're wrong about me too." Rosa studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity. To her surprise, she found none. "Fine," she said finally, "but if this goes through, I'm holding you accountable." "Deal," Daniel replied with a small smile. The scholarship proposal became a lightning rod for debate on campus. Supporters praised it as a necessary step toward equity, while detractors decried it as favoritism. Rosa found herself in the thick of the conversation, her name often invoked in arguments for and against the initiative. At a town hall meeting, Rosa stood up to address a particularly hostile question from an alumnus. "What message does this send to students who've earned their place here the traditional way?" the man asked. his tone dripping with disdain. Rosa's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone, but her voice was steady. It sends the message that Redstone values all its students, not just the ones who had every advantage growing up. Hard work and potential look different for everyone, and this initiative recognizes that. The room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs, but Rosa felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had said what needed to be said. The pressure reached its peak in the final days before the student council vote on the proposal. Rosa found herself pulled in every direction, attending meetings, rallying support, and managing the backlash from opponents. One night, Priya found her in the library, slumped over a pile of books. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Priya said, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. "I haven't," Rosa admitted, rubbing her temples. I feel like this is bigger than me, you know. If this doesn't pass, it's not just a loss for me. It's a loss for everyone who needs this." Priya nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. But don't forget, you're not alone in this. There are people behind you, Rosa. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." The reminder gave Rosa a small but vital sense of relief. On the morning of the vote, Rosa stood outside the student council building, her nerves frayed. A small crowd had gathered, students holding signs in support of the proposal. Rosa spotted familiar faces, Priya, Emily, even Daniel, who gave her a reassuring nod. The council deliberated for hours, and when the announcement finally came, Rosa held her breath. The proposal to expand scholarships for underserved students has passed with a majority vote. Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Rosa felt a wave of emotion crash over her. She had fought for this, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. That night, Rosa stood in front of the library, looking up at its towering facade. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the struggles, the triumphs, the moments when she thought she couldn't go on. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just for surviving Redstone, but for changing it. The weeks following the scholarship proposal's passage were some of the busiest and most rewarding of Rosa's life. Meetings with administrators, planning sessions with student leaders, and outreach to new scholarship recipients filled her days. For the first time, she felt not just like she belonged at Redstone, but like she was shaping its future. But change, Rosa quickly learned, doesn't come without resistance. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an email. The university's Alumni Association had scheduled a special session to discuss the impact of the scholarship program. The subject line alone set Rosa on edge. Preserving Redstone's legacy of excellence. "This doesn't sound good," Priya said when Rosa showed her the email. Rosa nodded grimly. "They're framing this as a threat. To them, expanding access means lowering their so-called standards." "Are you going to speak?" Priya asked. "I have to," Rosa said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The alumni session was held in the grand hall of the administration building, a space designed to intimidate. Rosa sat at the front of the room, flanked by a small group of student advocates, while a panel of prominent alumni sat across from them. The discussion started civilly enough, with alumni voicing concerns about maintaining Redstone's reputation. But it didn't take long for the conversation to grow heated. "I understand the desire for diversity," one alumnus said, his tone measured but patronizing. "But we have to ask ourselves, at what cost? Will this program dilute the caliber of students Redstone is known for?" Rosa's fists clenched under the table. She felt the eyes of the room on her, waiting to see how she would respond. She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Respectfully, sir, I think we need to redefine what we mean by caliber. If we only measure success by privilege and access, we're missing out on incredible talent and potential. Redstone's strength doesn't come from excluding people. It comes from including those who have fought to be here." Her words hung in the air, heavy with challenge. Before the alumnus could reply, another voice chimed in. "She's right." Rosa turned to see Daniel King standing near the back of the room. He stepped forward, his gaze steady. "I've seen firsthand what this program can do," Daniel continued. "Rosa isn't just one of the hardest working people I've met. She's made this campus better for everyone. If we don't adapt, Redstone will become irrelevant. The world is changing and we need to change with it." Rosa was stunned. Of all the people she had expected to defend her, Daniel wasn't one of them. The session ended without a clear resolution, but Rosa knew the battle wasn't over. Later that evening, as she walked back to her dorm, she spotted Daniel waiting for her outside. "I didn't expect that," Rosa said as she approached him. Daniel shrugged. "You were right. I've spent my whole life thinking Redstone belonged to people like me. But it doesn't. It belongs to people who earn it." For the first time, Rosa felt a genuine connection with him, not as adversaries but as equals. The final test of Rosa's resolve came during an open forum hosted by the university president. The forum was meant to address the backlash from certain alumni and students who opposed the scholarship expansion. Rosa was invited to speak, but she knew this would be the most hostile audience she'd ever faced. The auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, alumni, and local reporters filled every seat, their attention fixed on the stage. Rosa felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her as she took her place at the podium. She had prepared a speech, but as she looked out over the crowd, she decided to set her notes aside. "I wasn't supposed to be here," Rosa began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not at Redstone, not on this stage, and definitely not standing before all of you, fighting for something that should already be a given." The room was silent. "When I came to Redstone, I felt like an outsider. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders that this place wasn't built for people like me. But I stayed, I worked, and I proved that I belong. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been told their skin, their background, or their circumstances are limits." She paused, scanning the crowd. "This isn't about lowering standards. It's about raising them, about challenging this university to live up to its values. Excellence through legacy? Let's build a legacy we can all be proud of." The applause started slowly, but quickly grew into a standing ovation. Rosa felt a swell of emotion she couldn't contain. For the first time, she didn't just feel heard, she felt understood. As the applause faded, Rosa stepped back from the podium, her hands trembling. She had given everything she had to this fight, and in that moment she realized something. She wasn't just surviving at Redstone, she was transforming it. The open forum marked a turning point, not just for Rosa, but for the entire Redstone community. In the weeks that followed, the scholarship expansion program gained momentum. The administration announced plans to allocate additional resources, not only for financial aid, but for mentorship programs and community-building initiatives aimed at supporting underrepresented students. For Rosa, the victory was bittersweet. She had achieved what she set out to do, but the scars of the battle lingered. The hateful notes, the microaggressions, the constant need to prove herself, they were reminders of how far the world still had to go. But as she walked across campus now, she noticed more smiles, more nods of acknowledgement. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. One evening, Rosa found herself in the library, sitting in the same corner where she had discovered the old book that had inspired her months ago. She pulled it from the shelf, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Flipping to her favorite passage, she read the words aloud softly. "The strength of a soul is greater than the weight of any judgment." For the first time, she felt those words settle deeply within her, not as a hope or a mantra, but as a truth she had lived. Daniel King approached her a few days later as she sat outside under the campus's iconic oak tree. "So," he began, sliding into the seat across from her, "you're officially Redstone's favorite rebel." Rosa laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even herself. "I'm not sure if that's a compliment." "It is," Daniel said seriously. "You've done something incredible here, Rosa. People are starting to see this place differently because of you." "Not just me," Rosa corrected. "A lot of people fought for this." Daniel nodded. "True, but you were the spark." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching students pass by, their laughter and chatter filling the spring air. For once, Rosa allowed herself to just be present, without the weight of the next battle looming over her. On the last day of the semester, Rosa received a letter from the university president. She unfolded it carefully, her heart pounding. "Dear Ms. Martins, on behalf of Redstone University, I want to thank you for your dedication and advocacy. Your efforts have not only enriched this institution, but have paved the way for future generations of students. As a token of our gratitude, we would like to invite you to join the University Advisory Board for Diversity and Inclusion. We believe your voice will continue to guide us toward a brighter future." Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she read the words. She had fought to belong here, And now, Redstone was asking her to help shape its future. Years later, Rosa stood at the front of a lecture hall, facing a room full of eager students. As a professor of social policy, she was now teaching the very lessons she had once learned the hard way. On her desk sat a worn leather book, its gold-embossed title barely legible. She opened it to her favorite passage before beginning her lecture, the words still as powerful as ever. "The strength of a soul is greater than the weight of any judgment." Smiling, she looked out at her students, each of them brimming with potential. Rosa knew her fight hadn't ended with her time at Redstone. It had only begun. Rosa's journey is more than a story of perseverance. It's a testament to the power of courage, advocacy, and the unyielding belief that change is possible. Her fight didn't just alter her life. It reshaped an institution and lit the way for countless others to follow. But Rosa's story isn't just hers. It belongs to all of us. It challenges us to confront the limits we place on ourselves and others. It dares us to stand up, speak out, and dismantle systems of exclusion, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Now, it's your turn. What barriers will you break? Whose voices will you amplify? How will you use your own power to build a legacy of inclusion and opportunity? The strength of one soul can ignite a revolution. Be that spark. If Rosa's story inspired you, don't forget to follow our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, change, and hope. Join our community and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your voice as we continue to spark conversations that matter. Together, we can make a difference.